thank you for your patience. I have actually quite a bit of stuff for you. I will start off with a statement on Yemen. It will be issued in the Secretary General's own voice, statement directly from him. Over the past 6 months, the government of Yemen and the Houthis have taken important and bold steps towards peace by agreeing to and twice renewing a nationwide truce negotiated by the United Nations. With the 2nd October deadline for another extension quickly approaching, the Secretary General strongly urges the Yemeni parties not only to renew, but also expand the truce's terms and duration in line with the proposals presented by the Secretary General's Special Envoy for Yemen, Hans Grundberg. The truce, which first came into effect on April 2nd, has brought the longest period of relative calm to Yemen since the beginning of the war. Over the past 6 months, it has delivered tangible benefits and much-needed relief to the Yemeni people, including a significant reduction in violence and civilian casualties countrywide, an increase in fuel deliveries through Hodeidah port, and the resumption of international commercial flights to and from Sana'a airport for the first time in almost 6 years. Yet more needs to be done to achieve its full implementation, including reaching an agreement on the reopening of roads in Taiz and other governorates, and the payments of civil servants' salaries would further improve the day-to-day life for ordinary Yemenis. In parallel, work on long-term political, economic, and military issues, as proposed by his special envoy, would signal a significant shift towards finding lasting solutions. The Secretary General strongly urges the parties to seize this opportunity. This is the moment to build on the gains achieved and embark on a path towards the resumption of an inclusive and comprehensive political process to reach a negotiated settlement to end the conflict. The United Nations will spare no effort to support the parties in this endeavor. This is a time for all leaders to prioritize the needs and aspirations of the Yemeni people and act in the national interest of Yemen. This is a time to choose peace for good. And I also have a statement on the attacks in Kabul that we saw earlier today. The Secretary General strongly condemns today's heinous attack on an education center in the Dasht al-Barchi area of Kabul city, a predominantly Hazari Shia area, which caused scores of casualties, mostly women. He extends his condolences to the families of the victims and wishes a speedy recovery to those injured. Education is a fundamental right and an essential driver for sustainable peace and development. The Secretary General reiterates his call on all parties to ensure the protection of civilians. He also calls on the de facto authorities to protect the rights of all Afghans, regardless of ethnicity or gender, and to access education safely and securely. Of course, there was a statement also of condemnation also from the UN mission in Afghanistan, and of course, UNICEF. And just to give you some context, our colleagues in Kabul say that young women from the Hazari Shia community reportedly make up a 60 plus, more than 60 of them killed or injured were from women from the Hazari Shia community today. The mission stressed that those responsible must face justice and that the Taliban must fulfill obligations to ensure safety for all Afghans. Education must be prejudice and violence-free, they said. Turning to Ukraine, our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that an attack left scores of civilians killed and injured in the outskirts of Zaporizhzhia in the south of the country. The event took place earlier in the morning when civilians lined up to cross areas under Russian control were hit by shelling. That's according to our colleagues on the ground. Most of the people were apparently trying to bring supplies to their families or communities or to reunite with loved ones before the announcement was made today on the annexation by the Russian Federation. Unfortunately, this is only one of a number of attacks that killed or injured civilians in several parts of Ukraine today. Our humanitarian coordinator, Denise Brown, who heads the UN system, issued a statement condemning the attack. We, of course, send our most heartfelt condolences to the bereaved families and wish those injured a speedy recovery. Staying on Ukraine this afternoon, as you know, at 3 p.m., there will be Security Council meeting on Ukraine. Navid Hanif, who you know well, who's the Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, who will brief the Council members. Also, remaining on the overall topic of Ukraine, our World Food Program friends tell us that the motor vessel Ikaria Angel, which departed Ukraine carrying 30,000 metric tons of wheat on September 17th, is expected to arrive in Djibouti today. The cargo will be used for WFP's operations in Ethiopia, and 5,000 tons of it will be used in Djibouti itself. This was the third WFP chartered vessel. A fourth one, the bulk carrier Vanessa, is carrying 30,000 metric tons of wheat destined for Afghanistan that will travel there via Turkey, where it's going to be processed. A fifth WFP vessel, the New Island, was inspected on 29 September in the Sea of Marmara and will continue now on its voyage to Ukraine to load 30,000 metric tons of wheat. This time that will be destined for Somalia. WFP has so far procured 200,000 tons of wheat from Ukraine since the signing of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The UN agency notes that getting Ukraine grain into WFP's humanitarian operations will ensure benefits for both Ukraine's economy and to areas of the world hardest hit by the global food crisis. The Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul, which the UN set up, says that as of today, 241 vessels left Ukrainian ports carrying almost 5.5 million metric tons of grains and other foodstuff under the initiative. And just going back to this morning, you will have seen that Bintou Keita, the special representative of the Secretary General for the Democratic Republic of the Congo, briefed the Council. Her remarks were shared with you, and I do expect her to come to the stakeout to answer your questions. Just staying on the Congo, the humanitarian coordinator for the Congo, Bruno Le Marquis, called today for urgent action to stop the escalating violence in the provinces of Mai Ndombe and Kwilu in the west of the country. An upsurge in violence that started late June in Kwamuth territory in the province of Mai Ndombe has now spread to neighboring province of Kwilu. Dozens of people were killed and hundreds of homes were burned during the violence. According to the authorities, more than 35,000 people have been displaced to several localities in these provinces, as well as neighboring provinces of Kwango and Kinshasa. More than 1,400 people also crossed the Congo River to seek refuge in the neighboring Republic of the Congo. We and our humanitarian partners have provided basic assistance, such as healthcare and water and hygiene, sanitation, but important humanitarian needs remain. The humanitarian coordinator called for urgent additional emergency response measures and for authorities and those working in humanitarian peace and development areas to take measures to ease the situation and the tensions. Moving back across the continent to the Horn of Africa, the Secretary General says deeply concerned over reports of indiscriminate shelling and civilian casualties in the ongoing conflict in northern Ethiopia. He underlines that a sustainable peace cannot be found through military action. The Secretary General further notes that the continuation of the conflict jeopardizes the safety of civilians, the delivery of much-needed humanitarian assistance, and the stability of the broader Horn of Africa region. He reiterates his call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, the disengagement of regional countries from the conflict, and for the parties to move forward with the African Union-led mediation process as a sign of urgency. Also just want to give you a bit more granularity on the humanitarian situation in Ethiopia, especially in the northern part of the country where the situation remains unpredictable and fluid, with hostilities continuing to drive more people from their homes. Hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children have been displaced in parts of Tigray, Afar, and Amhara regions, and is affecting the lives and livelihoods of millions living in conflict areas. The humanitarian convoy movement into Tigray from Afar continues to be suspended, and that's since August 24th, which is obviously cutting off life-saving supplies to millions of people in need. The humanitarian air service to and from Tigray have also been suspended since August 25th, and that has halted our ability to rotate humanitarian workers in and out, and also the transport of key supplies as well as cash, which is a critical component of our humanitarian operations. Large parts of Tigray province, as well as several areas in Amhara and Afar regions, are now inaccessible due to the ongoing fighting. This is significantly disrupting our humanitarian operations, and as well as access to people in need, including displaced people. Humanitarian partners are, however, continuing to respond in areas that they can access in the three regions, despite obviously the many challenges they face, as well as the stretched resources and capacities we have. In Tigray, the remaining stocks of humanitarian goods continue to be distributed. Between the 15th and 21st of September, more than 775,000 people were reached with food, but due to limited supplies, some 230,000 of these people received less than they would have had received otherwise. In Amhara and Afar, our partners are providing newly displaced people with food, water, emergency shelter, and other supplies, as well as health services. In southern and northeastern parts of Ethiopia, communities are continuing to suffer devastating drought following 4 consecutive rainy seasons, failed rainy seasons, obviously. Our partners are now targeting about 17 million men, women, and children for assistance for the rest of the year in those areas, 17 million. We continue to call on the parties to the conflict to take constant care to spare civilians and civilian objects, including vital infrastructure, and of course, yet again, reiterate our call to immediately facilitate the resumption of rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian workers, supplies, so that we can help those people that need help in conflict areas, wherever they are, in accordance with international humanitarian law. We appeal with for urgent funding to support the response across Ethiopia. Our partners are reprogramming their response to address the most urgent needs and to sustain life-saving operations. In at least an additional $1.8 billion, which is 60% of the total amount needed, is still not with us. Moving on to another crisis, Burkina Faso, quite a bit today. We're obviously, just in time, more new lines on Burkina Faso. Where obviously the Secretary General is obviously following with concern the situation in Burkina Faso, where there have been reports of gunfire and strong military deployments in the capital Ouagadougou today. The United Nations calls for calm and the avoidance of further violence. Burkina Faso needs peace, it needs stability, and it needs unity in order to fight terrorist groups and criminal networks operating in parts of the country. The United Nations stands in solidarity with the people of Burkina Faso and remains committed to the country's swift return to a constitutional order. To give you a bit of a picture of what is going on in Burkina Faso and why the Burkinabes needs stability, as everyone does, but on the humanitarian front, the country continues to confront multidimensional crises as insecurity is growing. Nearly 1/5 of the national population urgently needs humanitarian aid. The number of security incidents increased by 220% in 2022 compared to last year. The intensity of the conflict remains higher in Burkina Faso than any other country in the Sahel region. At the end of August, 1 million people in Burkina Faso live in areas controlled by non-state armed groups. Some 1.7 million people are displaced, or that's 1 in 10 in the country. The country also faces the fastest growing displacement crisis in the world in 2022. The other two are Mozambique and Ukraine. I should have said this about Yemen, but that we're pleased to, positive note, we're pleased to report that an additional contribution of $2 million from the UN for the UN verification inspection mechanism have recently come in. This timely funding prevents a shutdown of the mechanism. As you've heard us say before, the mechanism plays a critical role in facilitating the entry of commercial goods into Yemen's Red Sea ports, with Yemen relying on commercial imports for 90% of its staple foods and basic goods. This funding extends an additional lifeline to millions of people in Yemen. In Mali, the UN peacekeeping mission continues to support the Malian authorities to bolster the capacity of its security forces to respond to threats, particularly in the center and north region. The mission has been supporting training organized by the Ministry of Security and Civil Protection, which is responsible for the security of civil and judicial authorities throughout the country. 30 agents in the police, the gendarmerie, and National Guard acquired knowledge on intervention techniques, including combat and rescue, the detection of improvised explosive devices, which is very important in Mali, and the code of conduct with an emphasis of respect for human rights. A total of 150 members of the Malian security forces will be trained by 2023. For its part, the broader efforts to develop specialized skills in areas such as civilian protection, crisis coordination, policing, human resources management, and ethics and professional conduct. Just to note that today's Secretary General appointed 8 new members of the Central Emergency Response Fund. The advisory group now has 20 members from Africa, Asia, Europe, the Gulf, Latin America, the Caribbean, North America, and Oceania. The group provides policy guidance and advice for use of the Central Emergency Response Fund to the Secretary General through Martin Griffiths, his Emergency Relief Coordinator. So far this year, the fund has allocated $559 million to support humanitarian operations in 37 countries, including crisis in Ukraine, addressing food insecurity in the Horn of Africa and the Sahel. The full list is online. Today is the International Day of what? Podcast. That's interesting. No, International Translation Day, which means that it's an opportunity to pay tribute to the work of language professionals. They play an important role in bringing nations together, facilitating dialogue, understanding, cooperating, contributing to development, strengthening world peace and security. And we thank all our translators here at the UN who played a critical part in our work. Tomorrow is a day that I find increasingly important, which is the International Day of Older Persons. This year's theme is Resilience of Older Persons in a Changing World. And Sunday, a day we should all mark, which is the International Day of Nonviolence. On Monday, there will be a briefing here after I'm done with the President of the Security Council for the month of October, Ambassador Michel-Xavier Biang of Gabon. He will brief on the program of work. Just want to flag that, as you may have seen, the International Telecommunications Union elected Doreen Bogdan-Martin of the U.S. as its new Secretary General. She is the first ever woman to be elected as ITU Secretary General in the organization's 157-year history. The ITU predates the UN and the League of Nations. And we welcome her and congratulate her. Also, on a big positive note, we say a big thanks to our friends in Beijing. They have paid their membership dues, which is $438 million and change. So thank you. Just want to say goodbye to 2 people today who are leaving for whatever reason to see whatever exists outside of our world here. First, your colleague Amanda Price of Al Jazeera, who's decided she's had enough of us. I don't know if it was because I didn't answer her questions or I didn't answer them properly, but I hope it wasn't me. We will, of course, I know you will join me, and we'll miss her having around either at the stakeout or watching the briefing from the safety of her Al Jazeera suite on the 3rd floor. We'll miss her professionalism, her dry sense of humor, and her all-around great personality. So we wish her luck in her next adventure, and I hope she gets a break and tells us what happens outside. The other person I want to say goodbye to is one you don't see often, but who plays a critical role, and that is Brian Walsh from UNTV, who's been working here and covered 41 General Assemblies, but for some reason it looks like he's just about 19 years old. But for some reason, he too has had enough after 41 years. He is one of our unheralded colleagues who work hard to ensure that the visual output is always great and top quality. I know some of you are not always happy, but I can tell you that Brian and his colleagues are constantly trying to do more with less, often jerry-rigging technology so it meets our needs. On a personal note, Brian has been an invaluable help to me and has saved my rear end a number of times, especially when I was in the news and media division. And just to show you his yesterday he complained that the vibrations from my phone hurt the sound. So he sent over this little cushion today for my phone. So always working, and most importantly, he's a Mets fan, so we wish him luck and congratulate him. I've spoken enough. It's up to you, Edie.
Thank you, Steph. And first, on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, let me wish our best to both Amanda and to Brian. We're sure there'll be great successes in whatever path they choose for their next careers. Two questions. First, on Yemen, the Special Representative, Mr. Grundberg, has expressed concern that the truce may not be renewed. Can you tell us what's the status of negotiations?
Well, the negotiations are ongoing. He's been, I think over the last week or so and before, meeting with Representative of Ansar Allah, meeting with Yemeni government, Saudis, Omanis. He and his team are also speaking to civil society. I think it's an all-out effort. And I think from the statement that I read out, it is clear to see what the benefits of the truce are. I mean, it's not, nobody needs a PhD in diplomacy to figure out that this period of calm is good for the Yemeni men, women, and children who have suffered so much since the beginning of the conflict. And we hope that Mr. Grundberg's efforts and the Secretary General's calls for continuations are heeded.
We all heard the Secretary General deliver his statement yesterday. Today, President Putin held a ceremony in the Kremlin and announced the annexation of the 4 Ukrainian territories. I wondered if the Secretary General had any further comment, and also on Ukrainian President Zelensky's announcement that Ukraine plans to go ahead and submit an application to join NATO.
On NATO, I don't have any specific comment, and I think yesterday the Secretary General was very clear. What happened today in no way changes what he had to say yesterday. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Stéphane. I'm Natalie Lutsenko, ICTV station, Ukraine. My question one was about Putin, but you already answered, and another one is about Zaporizhia missiles attack. Do the United Nations planning to send any investigation group there? Because obvious that Russia putting every blame on Ukrainian side. Thank you.
We do not have the UN needs specific mandates to do specific investigations. So on the issue of the fact-finding mission for Lenivka, we have that mandate. That's still waiting for the proper green lights. I think today is just yet another example of the price that civilians have been paying. And this is why the Secretary General wants to see a de-escalation. He wants to see a stop to the violence. Yep.
Thank you so much. I want to ask about this yesterday's statement. So, as we all understood, it was one of the strongest statements from a top diplomat, as Mr. Guterres is. Previously, he was doing every best not to insult Russia's soul, I would say. And Russians got offended yesterday. Did it somehow, can it spoil the further negotiations process with Russia, the reaction?
You can all interpret what the Secretary General says and qualify it in whichever way you want. That's your role as journalist. This was not meant as an insult. It was meant as a reaffirmation of the Secretary General's role as Secretary General, a defense of the charter and the principles on which this organization is built. And he very much hopes that contacts will continue. The Secretary General does not believe in any way that communications need to be halted. On the contrary, at a time of conflict and great suffering, it is more important than ever that he be able to speak to all the parties involved. Madame, and then. Yep.
There is an attempt to control and hijack the presidential elections in Lebanon by the Speaker of the House and his allies. What mechanism the UN has in hand to ensure that free and fair presidential election will take place effectively? Thank you.
What we would like to see is for all Lebanese political leaders to put the interest of all Lebanese people in the forefront. I think the Lebanese people are suffering. They're going through tremendous crisis, and they need to have leadership that will guide them out of this crisis. Deji.
Hi, Steph. I believe you have already seen the response from the Russian delegation on the statement of yesterday, the SG statement. Basically, they just said the remarks from the Secretary General is biased. They give two arguments. One is responding to what you just said now. They said, administrative functions do not give the Secretary General the right to make political statements on behalf of the UN as a whole. That's the first argument. The second argument is they have been accusing UN being double standard on many issues. One of them is, the referenda of the East Ukraine, because they compared this issue with Malvinas Islands, where still occupied by UK, and UN. I mean, as a Secretary General, they didn't really comment on that, and also talked also about the situation of Kosovo in Yugoslavia. They also accused the UN being silent that time. So any response from the
well, listen, I as I like to say, I will leave the compare and contrast to you. The Secretary General is confident in what he said yesterday and his right to say it, and his responsibility to say it. I would say, of course, Article 97, as you well know, says the Secretary General is the Chief Administrative Officer of the organization, but he's not only that, right? I think he has a political role, political powers, political responsibilities, which are inherent in his office, which he can exercise his own initiative. There's also Article 99, which states that the Secretary General has a responsibility to bring to the attention of the Security Council the threats to international peace and security, which in itself is a political act. I think over the years, I established through precedent and unchallenged practice is the authority of the Secretary General to make statements on matters involving or affecting the organization. The power includes the authority to make statements on specific actions of specific states that may not be or are not consistent with the principles on which the UN is founded. And if you look back, different secretaries general have spoken out. I mean, look to the what Kofi Annan said about the war in Iraq. Right, that it would if I recall, that he said it would be in contravention of the charter, right? So, Secretaries General, Utant has done it. I mean, Ban Ki-moon, Kofi Annan, Dag Hammarskjöld. Dag Hammarskjöld criticized very clearly France and the UK during the Suez crisis. So I think there is a precedent, but it is. Going back to the question that was raised, it is not personal. It is not an insult. it is for the Secretary General exercising his responsibilities.
And my second question, this afternoon, the Security Council meeting about the Nord Stream the situation, who would be the briefer from the UN?
Navid Hanif from Dessa. From Dessa, from Dessa. Yes, sir.
Hello, Kurush Diabari, DACAM School Fellow. The reports have emerged from Iran following an announcement by the Iranian government that amid the ongoing protests, 9 foreign nationals, including the nationals of Germany, Italy, France, the Netherlands, and others, and Poland as well, have been arrested. And also the ongoing protest is being suppressed by the government. So many athletes, artists, journalists have also been detained. What is the reaction by the United Nations to these reports, and how do you specifically respond to the detention of these 9 foreign nationals that the government has announced?
I mean, people are people. So I think people who've been arbitrarily arrested, regardless of their nationality, should be released. Otherwise, due process and fairness should be applied. Beitul.
Thank you, Steph. Let me take you to the islands in the Aegean Sea. Greece has recently militarized some of the islands in the Aegean Sea, which has led to tension once again between Turkey and Greece. But there are international agreements such as the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne and 1947 Treaty of Paris, and they clearly say that these islands need to be demilitarized and any dispute need to be negotiated between the two countries. Is the UN concerned about the militarization of the islands in the Aegean Sea? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think we've obviously are very much aware of the tensions building in the area and the statements coming out both from Athens and Ankara. And for the Secretary General, it's important to underscore that actions and statements that can heighten tensions should be avoided. And he reiterates the importance of resolving all disputes peacefully. In this context, he encourages Greece and Turkey to continue with bilateral dialogue as a means to lower tensions. On the legal aspects that you raised, from the Secretariat's point of view, we do not take a position or provide comments in relation to matters concerning the sovereignty or sovereign rights and jurisdiction of member states over their maritime space. Evelyn.
Thank you, Steph. Is there any indication of who was responsible for the bombing in Kabul of the education center?
Besides whoever claimed responsibility, we have no investigative power or authorities. What you'd have to look at the news reports. What we do know is that young people, young women, young men, full of potential, were killed because they wanted to learn. I mean, what words do we use to characterize that? Stefano.
Thank you, Stéphane. Yesterday, the Secretary General told us why those referendums are illegal. When those
those are your words, but go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, he didn't say that?
I mean, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, my question is, how the referendum held in this territory, in the east part of, and at the moment in the east part of Ukraine, occupied by Russia, when and how they could be considered illegal, in what circumstances? I mean, of course, the Russian will have to withdraw their forces, but can you tell us when the Secretary General will consider a referendum held in those territory legal, where the international law will recognize them?
I mean, I would encourage you to read the relevant documents. I'm not going to hypothesize on things that did not happen. So I can only, the Secretary General expressed himself on something that happened, but on the, I'm not going to delve into that. Okay, Paulina, you're up, and then when Paulina is done, we will bring Bintu Keita to the Security Council stakeout, so you can ask her questions about the Congo. Okay? Thank you. Yeah, thank you.